Day 240 to 10:33 a.m. Mount Canlaon, Municipality of Codcod, Province of Negros Occidental. The cold tone that Mark used when calling the name of the Visayan goddess of the underworld. May and Amihan immediately knew that something was going on. Now, you don't have to be that angry. Magwayan let out a smile in a teasing way. It was as if this was nothing of importance to her at all. Mark stared at Magwayan. It was Magwayan who told them that the fight was not over yet. But before Magwayan could continue, a hole in space opened in front of them. There, several people passed through the portal. Aside from Ilya, Chemetris, and the two sisters, everyone else in Mark's group arrived to check on Mark. And once they saw Mark's state, they could not help but frown. The only one unappalled by the scene was Miracle. Being just a few months old, despite her current 3-year-old appearance, she could not understand the situation at all. She only knew that Mark was in pain, transmitted through the connection between the two. As such, Miracle tried to jump onto Mark and hug him. If she succeeded, Mark's body, which was basically on the verge of breaking, would turn for the worse. But before the little girl could do so, a tug on her collar paused Miracle on her steps. Papa will get hurt more if you do that. Iola reprimanded her youngest sister. She already grasped the behaviors of her sisters and could react accordingly. Miracle pouted her lips and blew her cheeks. Nonetheless, she did not struggle out of Iola's grasp. Spera approached Mark and squatted down. I can't believe you got one-shotted like that. Spera jeered. Why don't you try facing that then? I'll cheer on you. Mark grumbled in annoyance. As if I will act. Spera tried to argue, but her head was hit by someone. Don't bother, Master. Ephelia scolded Spera. The mistress will get angry at you if you continue further. Spera could only turn to May and see her wet eyelashes due to the tears she had just now. But most of all, she had a cold expression this time. Sorry. Spera had no choice but to stop and apologize. Why did you bring everyone? We are not finished here. Mark asked Spera. Everyone is worried about you, all right. Spera snarkily replied. I had to pick them all up. Jaya, Jero, and Ephelia had stayed behind since they could not move as fast, but they were all worried about you. At this time, Abigail approached Mark. Papa, are you okay? Abigail asked. The calm girl could not hide her worry at Mark's current state. I'm fine. Mark let out an assuring smile to his daughter before turning back to Magwayan. Though it would be better if the suspicious goddess here would answer my question already. Everyone turned to Magwayan. They just realized that something was happening when they arrived. Now, I feel like I'm going to get eaten, Magwayan joked and faced Mark. About your question, I don't really have any meaning or plans in this situation. But you knew this would happen. Mark interjected. I can't say I did not, but I can't say I did, either. Magwayan replied in riddles. Can you go straight to the point? Mark demanded in annoyance. Other mortals would grovel in front of a god. Yet, you are brave enough to try and yell at me. Magwayan sure found this situation interesting. Well then, I'll answer. It is not like I knew that this would happen exactly. It was just within the possibilities that could occur. Magwayan then briefly explained what was happening. And the reason why Sinogo turned back into what seemed to be his original body was clearly Mark, to everyone's surprise. If anyone else except Mark, or if he used another way to kill Sinogo, this situation would have been avoided. And the reason? It was Mark's miasma. Sinogo was never a crocodile in the first place. He was a giant and one of the 3 messengers of the supreme sky god, Kaptan. During the events of his faithlessness, he managed to transform using the golden shell he stole, but it was temporary. In the end, it was Kaptan who turned Sinogo into a crocodile before sealing him under the waters of Tanyon Strait. However, Kaptan was the god of sky. Although he could change his appearance, he never had the ability to transform something into something else, especially for a very long time. He was neither a god of creation nor a god of tricks to pull this off. Nonetheless, There was another way for a god to transform a creature into a different one. A curse. Sinogo was cursed by Koptan into the form of a crocodile indefinitely. Since the curse was engraved inside Sinogo, it should never be broken. Unless the curse was corrupted and weakened. Mark, who shot a pillar of miasmic lightning unto Sinogo, weakened and broke the curse, giving Sinogo the opportunity to return to his original form. Everyone listened to the explanation while they helped Mark heal. His wounds were clearly healing at a rapid rate, but it was still slow due to his broken bones and torn muscles. The broken bones were hindering the healing due to being dislocated and protruding out of his skin. Seriously, it was amazing that he was still alive. Anyone else in his current state would already die of either shock or blood loss. His organs might have been damaged too. Even if he had rapid regeneration, it would not be enough to keep him alive. But Mark, he was still alive. It did not make any sense. Mark closed his eyes with a frown. The pain was getting into his nerves, but the headache that Magwayan brought was far more annoying for him. This was not the first time. Magwayan was someone who just let them walk into the trial of regrets without even saying a single word about it. It was hard to determine, but Magwayan might not be lying about having no plans at all. As she said, the curse was weakened with Mark's attack with miasmic properties, and Sinogo could have died already if a different attack was used on him. Still, it would have been better if Magwayan gave them a warning beforehand. But before anyone could give that question, Magwayan explained. I cannot feed you everything. I am a goddess from another world. If I interfere too much, it will backfire on me. At this time, at least, it seems that you know your place. A hostile voice was heard, speaking to Magwayan. The voice sounded familiar to the group, however. And out of nowhere, a door appeared and opened. There, two familiar figures emerged. The Eye of Excitement, 4th, and the Eye of Interest, 19th. The hostile voice clearly came from 19th since 4th was now back to her form of a little girl. Instead of replying to the hostile remark, Magwayan faced Mark. See, that was right. The eyes were hostile to foreign gods of the past. And as a goddess outside of Earth, Magwayan's actions were something that would change Earth if it went out of control. Wah, you really got beat up. 4th ignored Magwayan and 19th and went straight to her candidate. For the two of you to appear here. This turned into a big deal, isn't it? Mark spoke to 4th. It had always been a big deal ever since that guy broke his seal. 4th replied, looking at the battlefield. You know, all of us eyes were watching the moment he emerged from the waters of the strait. We also saw what you did and how you ended up like this. Still, how can you get beaten up in one hit? The others were jeering at me because of that. 4th grumbled. Mark could only give 4th a dead stare. It seemed that they were having fun watching this kind of battle. But if they were still calm about this, Mark noticed something. As Sinogo faded to return to his original body, Mark asked straight to the point. However, both the eyes could not reply to Mark. After all, the answer would be related to the records that they could not just go and divulge. But even so, that silence gave Mark the confirmation. Even without this event, Sinogo would return to his humanoid form sooner or later. It was just his actions that made it happen sooner than it was supposed to. I suggest for you to retreat, 19th spoke to Mark. You are not strong enough to fight Sinogo. What will happen if we did? Mark asked 19th. This time, the Eye of Interest did not fall silent. The middle and southern areas of this country would be destroyed in a month. Afterward, the remaining land would be gone by another 2. It means even our place will get destroyed. Mark said to everyone's dismay. And to Mark's words, the two eyes fell silent once more. After they retreated in this battle, their country would be as good as gone. The only way to survive was to leave for another country. Mark took a deep breath. Well, that won't do. Do you want to die here? 19th asked Mark in all seriousness. Of course, I don't. Mark sneered. But if we flee to another place, we have to start all over again. Well, do you know? I hate repeating playthroughs mid-game. It makes me feel that everything I did before was wasted. This is not a game. 19th argued. It was unusual for an eye to be this resolute in trying to convince a mortal. However, yeah, this is not a game. Slowly, Mark lifted his back with May's help. And that's one more reason for me to stay and fight. And more than everything, Mark added, I already know the feeling of losing everything. I don't want to experience that. Mark said with his eyes closed. That last sentence reverberated inside the minds of Iola and Ephelia. The ones that remembered their loss on the planet, Arielis. Besides, Mark smiled. I haven't tried everything yet. And then, Mark's body began to glow. Mark already finished realigning his bones, and his body had already begun healing. Add to that, Mark downed a vial of regeneration medicine that he had. This was the fastest healing Mark had experienced. But what was the glow for? Everyone was surprised by it. Both the eyes and Magwyan were no exceptions. Furthermore, the light around his body was cozy and warm. That feeling made the ones that experienced this light before remember. It was Mark's other ability. The one that gave them comfort and calmness. It was the magical healing hands that Mark inherited from his ancestor. The magical healing hands were only supposed to show their healing properties towards spirits and elementals. But how was it able to accelerate the healing of Mark's body? On here that everyone noticed. Mark was murmuring unintelligible words, and he was actually holding the butterfly of knowledge in his right hand. He was already in a trance, healing his body at a rapid pace that it looked miraculous. That was right. Mark had not tried everything yet. But even so, 4th and 19th thought that it would not be enough just to heal his body. That was then, as if mocking the two, Mark's body had shown changes. Mark had markings on his body ever since he absorbed the deity of bloodshed and gained the ability to control miasma. When his bloodline as a blood demon awakened, these markings also changed and grew. After Mark received the blessing after the trial of regrets, these markings turned golden during his transformation. But now, the golden color of the markings was fading. It faded in a way as if it was being swallowed by the dark color. Mark snapped from his trance. His body was still enveloped with the cozy glow. It was like a shell, making everyone step back. And there, he uttered. Finally. Boom. The light exploded, making everyone step back and cover their eyes. As the light vanished, Mark's figure emerged. He was fully healed. But most of all, the golden markings on his body were no more and turned back to black. Mark spread out his 3 pairs of wings. Far from looking like a bat's, it changed. It looked more like a dragon's now, with the metallic sheen it had. The most surprising thing, however, the black markings on his body now spread unto his wings. Mark felt refreshed. His fatigue and tiredness were all gone. Most of all, his body evolved further. Getting beaten up completely was a blessing in disguise. Day 240 to 10:45 a.m. Mount Canlayan, Municipality of Codcod, Province of Negros Occidental. Under everyone's watch, Mark completely healed. They were all surprised, and the godly figures present were no exception. This event was definitely outside the expectations of the 3. Gerger. May sure was happy to see Mark recover and jumped to embrace him. And seeing their mother, both Abigail and Miracle also jumped in. Mark's state before was definitely worrying, and they were now relieved. If you can do that, you should have done it from the start, Spera snarkily remarked. Don't make everyone worry. So, you're also worried? Mark teased. Wah no. Spera immediately denied it, but she was already caught. I tried it the moment I crashed, you know that. Mark explained. But it did not work properly. It only tried to heal my wounds without realigning my bones. Luckily, the pain made me snap out before anything could heal, or else I might have turned into a bone porcupine that can't move since my bones are all misplaced. Everyone could not help but groan as Mark described what could have happened. So, That was why Mark downed a regeneration medicine, and let his body heal while manually realigning his bones. It was only when his body was in the right state that he fully healed himself. What happened might have looked amazing, but it was not an omnipotent ability. In the first place, it was a healing ability that was supposed to be used on elementals and spirits, who had bodies made of energy. And not all of them had physical bodies with organs and bones. Anyway, you have to give another explanation, Mark said, turning to Magwine. But that's for later. No one understood what Mark was talking about. They could only turn to Magwine. Ha! Magwine sighed with a bitter expression. I don't know what to expect anymore. Those words definitely meant that there was something else that only Mark and Magwine knew. Then, Mark stood up and began to form his blood into an armor covering his whole body. This blood metal armor was not new to everyone since Mark had worn the same armor every time his clothes got tattered. Amazingly, however, the armor complemented the new appearance of Mark's wings. You're really going to continue? Fourth asked. Some things might have changed on your body, but it will not guarantee you a win against that thing. That's a middle deity with the strength of a lower god. He might not be able to utilize his full power yet, but it is not something that mortals could fight. I know, Mark replied. But escaping is not an option for me. Gurgur. At this time, May interjected. Let me help. And surprisingly, me too. A Mehan shouted. May was one thing, but it was rather uncharacteristic for a Mehan. After all, this sylph was someone easily scared. Mark fell silent. He could have declined, but he could tell that they were determined. Furthermore, if he agreed, the others might come too. But before Mark could decide, Magwine spoke. Let those two come. The others might not be able to help much, but those two might give you a good surprise. What are you saying? Are you planning something again? Mark frowned. Magwine was again with her cryptic, playful words. Are you trying to meddle in the affairs of this world again? 19th also spoke, questioning what Magwine was trying to do. However, Magwine ignored the hostile question and only faced Mark. Whether I have plans or not, you will have no choice. Sinogo might be the weakest of my husband's 3 messengers, but he was still gifted with godly speed. You will need someone whose eyes could catch up with that speed. Mark had no retort to that. Among everyone here, it was May who had the fastest eyes. Can you follow Sinogo's movements? Mark asked May. Not too clear, but I can at least see his blurred movements. I can probably see more if I do this. May replied, and she underwent her own transformation. Like Mark, she also shared a demon's pure blood and had a pure blood transformation. This was not the first time she had this transformation, and Mark was not surprised. Everyone else was surprised, though, as it was the first time they saw her transform. With May finishing her transformation, she turned to the battlefield. There, Sinogo and Chimetrice were still exchanging attacks at fast speeds and were at a stalemate. I can see it, May said before turning to Mark. Then, Mark could only agree. A Mehan's presence would also help May just in case something unexpected happened. All right, you two will come with me, Mark told May and Mehan and turned to the others. Jaya, call Ilya. Everyone board the mini cube. Spera, be alert and prepare an escape route. I don't really want to retreat, but just in case. No one questioned Mark, although they were dismayed by the fact that they could not join the battle due to their weakness. On the other hand, 19th and 4th were relieved that Mark still prepared an escape route. Ephelia, hold this. Mark tossed the artifact, the Mark of Kings, to Ephelia. I don't want any distractions. Magwine shrugged. For a goddess to be called a distraction, this was the first. In any case, she could not do anything about it. Her current form in this world was just an avatar that could only move around the artifact. Mark nodded to May, and the two soared to the sky. A Mehan waved her hand while sitting on May's shoulder. The air resistance vanished, making their flight faster and smoother. Take this. Mark handed May his current stash of empty mental crystals. There's only 15, but don't hesitate to use it. Okay. May nodded, not intending to waste any shot from her weapon. Mark flew with May and Amihan over the battlefield. There were more casualties from the magical army than before, although most of the deaths were just collateral damage from the clashes between Sinogo and Chemetris. Chemetris could not care less about the deaths. After all, he had his hands full with just keeping up with Sinogo's speed. Fortunately, the two were tied in strength. Unluckily, however, they were also tied in terms of defense and speed. That was why while the two fought continuously for more than 15 minutes, there was still no clear winner. Worse, Sinogo was getting more and more used to his current body and strength. His movements were getting smoother, while his speed was getting faster. Bam! Sinogo kicked the ground, causing the ground to collapse, hurling debris at the surrounding magical creatures. More of them died, but the magical army continued fighting. They had no choice. Even if just a tiny bit, even if they lost their lives, they would continue to fight. If they lost here, none of them would have a place to return, even if they managed to survive. Mark nodded to May and Amihan, and he separated from the two. He would fight Sinogo head-on with Chemetris while May and Amihan would provide support. However, Mark's magical energy was running low. The miasmic judgment he used against Sinogo used up about 3/4 of his magical reserves. He then used more while healing his body. Then, there was only one way left for Mark to fight Sinogo. Mark extended his right hand sidewards. The psycrystal on his wrist was stimulated and let out a bright glow. 5 crystals were summoned, and each let out a different light from the others. The wind manipulation crystal glowed green. It was the crystal that came from Chemetris. The Stormcaller crystal glowed blue. This crystal held the power of the King of Mermaids. The Photokinesis crystal glowed white. The crystal Mark used the most and the very first psychic crystal he got after the apocalypse started. The Flame manipulation crystal glowed bright red. The crystal that Mark surprisingly obtained from the magma infected. The very same power and energy that Garvlam held. And the last one. It was a crystal with a murky brown glow. This crystal came from the deity-level earth demon that possessed Paphile's brother. Mark had yet to figure out the use of this crystal, but Mark had no choice. This would be the first time he would use this crystal and the time he would know of its ability. With the 5 crystals circling around Mark's wrist, he soared towards Chemetris and Sinogo. And the moment that he reached a certain distance, a figure emerged in front of Mark. As expected, Mark murmured as the wind manipulation crystal glowed. He was then flung to the side, and a giant hand passed through his previous position. Bam! Sinogo landed on the ground with a loud sound and crushing a lot of magical creatures beneath his feet. This guy just went and pulled another swat at Mark without warning. The hatred and fear that Sinogo felt from Mark could not be disguised at all. He was fighting Chemetris for more than 15 minutes already, but the moment he saw Mark, he left his current opponent and proceeded to try to kill the latter. However, sad to say, but the same sneak attacks only work once. Mark yelled as the flame manipulation crystal flew in front of his hand and released a bright glow. Bloom. A cloud of flames shot towards Sinogo's back before he could even stabilize his fall. The cloud of flames exploded, blooming like a giant flower. Many witnesses did not expect much about those flames. Among the magical creatures, many could attack with flames. And those flames did not damage Sinogo at all. However, to everyone's surprise, "Raaaaoo." Sinogo roared in pain as his back was slightly burnt. Even his hair was hinged but, unfortunately, did not burn completely. Nonetheless, for the first time since Sinogo regained his body, he received damage. Unfortunately, the pain was temporary. Sinogo waved his right hand and turned his body, extinguishing the flames instantly. And as if copying Mark, small balls of light appeared in front of Sinogo's palm and shot toward Mark. Mark immediately shot sidewards, using the wind manipulation crystal to aid his flight and speed. Circling and maneuvering across the sky, Mark evaded the beams one by one. However, Shinogo continued to fire the beams of light one after another. But then, tham! Shinogo's body trembled as his right knee bent forward. Below, Chimetrice appeared, unleashing a punch behind Shinogo's right knee. Shinogo was too focused on Mark that he had already forgotten Chimetrice. Shinogo could only stop his attack on Mark because he almost fell sidewards. But as if his loss of balance was not enough. Boom! A beam of light shot onto his left temple. The unexpected attack not only pushed Shinogo to fall to the ground but it left a deep burn on Shinogo's face. Raw! Shinogo roared as he released several beams towards the direction the attack that hit his temple came from. There, Mei and Amihan worked together, flying at fast speeds, leaving nothing but blurs. Boom! Shinogo's face was smashed to the ground, causing an explosion of dust and stone around him. Chimetrice left Shinogo's knee and unleashed a kick onto the back of the giant's head. GG Gra! Shinogo did not lay down for long as he raised his head fast enough to throw Chimetrice way up in the sky. Chimetrice immediately retaliated and flew down to smash Shinogo's head to the ground once more. However, boom! Chimetrice's attack hit the ground as Shinogo vanished quickly and appeared at another location. Grr! Shinogo growled, glaring at Mark, Mei, and Chimetrice. All of a sudden, not only did the person he felt afraid of return alive, but another ant appeared. He could feel the throbbing pain in his temple. The attack that hit him sure was not simple, and it came from the new enemy. However, Shinogo noticed something. Compared to the first two enemies, he did not feel any fear toward the new enemy. Shinogo panned his eyes, locking onto Mark once more. Then, bam! Shinogo kicked the ground and vanished. It made Mark brace himself for another attack. However, Shinogo appeared in front of Mei, ignoring Mark and Chimetrice, who he was supposed to be focusing on. This time, they realized. It was not only his body. Shinogo's mind was also rapidly evolving and mutating. He was beginning to learn to trick his enemies, striking the weakest of them when they least expected it. Day 240 to 10:49 a.m. Mount Canlaon, Municipality of Codcod, Province of Negros Occidental. Shinogo was rapidly evolving. He began to adapt to its new body, and his intelligence was rising fast. From the intelligent predator that still behaved like a wild beast, he began learning to trick his foes and attack with feints. The balance of his body was improving, and his speed was also increasing. Even his use of his magical attacks was getting better. Since Shinogo gained the body that the real Shinogo had before getting cursed, it would not be long before he would learn how to speak and utilize his abilities to their maximum. Sooner or later, if left alone, Shinogo would become a threat far worse than he currently was. It was something that would happen without a shred of doubt. That was why he must perish here. Sneak attacks were not new to Shinogo. He pulled this trick several times on Mark and succeeded twice. It was a pity for him that Mark was just as unkillable as a cockroach. Now, Shinogo learned how to pull sneak attacks while employing new tricks. He stared at Mark before attacking, making the latter brace for the incoming attack when the truth was Shinogo was going to attack someone else. And that someone was Mei. This would have been dangerous. Unlike Mark and Chimetrice, Mei's body was far more fragile. But compared to Mark and Chimetrice, Mei had the fastest reflexes among the three. As Shinogo appeared in front of Mei with barely any gust of wind, Mei's eyes dilated and slowed down everything in her sight. She could clearly see Shinogo moving his right hand over his shoulder to swat her to the ground. And as fast as the hand fell on Mei from above, her body flashed with bright light. Shinogo passed through its trajectory, but nothing was hit by this hand and fell to the ground. Instead, THOOOM. Bam! Shinogo lost balance as a powerful beam of light hit the very same left temple that was hit before. Not to mention that the attack had far more force than the previous one. It was because Mei fired that beam using the crystal converter, at point-blank range. Shinogo was unaware, but everyone else saw it. May turned into a flash of light, disappearing before his right hand hit her and appeared right beside his head. It was the ability Mark gave her from the first crystal he had years before. An ability similar to Mark's shadow mist movement, but with different rules and effects to follow. At the same time that May fired her gun, a Mihan on her shoulder made her attack. The sylph conjured a strong gust of wind that pushed Sinogo amidst his loss of balance. Bam! Sinogo fell to his right side, causing the magical creatures below to retreat quickly. His body might be faster and as strong as his crocodile form. But the smaller body he had was far easier to topple than the aircraft carrier-sized golden crocodile. Sinogo became even more enraged because of his uncanny fall. But most of all, everyone was surprised when Sinogo let out his first words that did not sound like beastly growls. It was still unintelligible. Nonetheless, from growls to something that sounded like words, it was a clear sign of Sinogo's rapidly developing mind. With Sinogo falling down, many magical creatures saw this as an opportunity to attack, especially the scalded looking back of Sinogo after Mark's attack. They might not be able to approach the guy too close because of the pressure emitted by Sinogo, but they could at least attack from a distance. However, the magical creatures could only let out a few attacks before turning into either dust or meat pieces after Sinogo whipped his tail at bullet speed. The shockwave created by the attack even staggered the strongest ones among the magical army, while most were blown away by the force of the shockwave. But revenging the deaths, a ball of light shot onto Sinogo's face, causing him to stagger once more before he could even attempt to stand up. There, Tinala and Binatuan took advantage of the situation, both holding onto a familiar-looking staff. So, that's where it went, Mark said, relaxing after seeing May and Amihan safe and sound. Like what Magwayan had said, the two would be of great help in this fight. But that was not Mark's current focus of attention. It was the crystal spear-like staff that the Dewata sisters were holding. When Sinogo swatted Mark away, while he managed to hold tightly onto the butterfly of knowledge, he lost grip of the crystal staff, and it was flung somewhere. It looked like the two Dewatas managed to find it while Mark and his entourage got Sinogo's attention. Holding tightly onto the crystal staff, Tinala and Binatuan tried to conjure another attack. However, dodge. Tinala pushed Binatuan away as she moved in the opposite direction. A beam of light passed through their initial position. But before the two could even stabilize themselves in the air. Thoom. 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 Hundreds of balls of light appeared around Sinogo and started to discriminately fire beams everywhere. Everyone hurried to run and dodge. It was the same for the magical creatures in the field. The rain of beams of light immediately killed hundreds of magical creatures while Sinogo slowly stood up from his fall. However, the ants below were the least of his concern as he stared at Mark's group, together with the two Dewatas, as they all joined up together. Sinogo suddenly felt a surge of energy in the surroundings. He noticed Mark raising his right hand up to the sky. What he did not notice was the magical army beginning to retreat, especially the fire elementals. The sky darkened further as the clouds began to gather. Succumbing to the feeling of threat, Sinogo charged onto Mark. He intended to stop whatever Mark was doing. But, of course, that would not be easy. Before Sinogo could even kick the ground, May already appeared in front of Mark. Her shooting moon blade was already charged up and ready to fire. Thoom. Sinogo moved at frightening speeds, but he had one flaw. In his current state, he had very little control over his movements. And thus, he was more prone to moving straight. With May moving between Sinogo and Mark and firing opposite of the latter, Sinogo faced a full brunt beam shot from May right on his face. Sinogo did not incur too much damage except for the face on his skin being burnt. But the sudden bright light blinded him to lose his direction and target. The giant passed by Mark's group without touching them at all and fell ways behind their position. And there, Mark succeeded in what he was doing. Drop by drop, The rain began to fall. A strong storm was invoked by Mark, and the visibility of the surroundings began to lower. No wonder the magical army, especially the fire elementals, retreated. In this kind of storm, they would not be able to do anything. Luckily, Mark informed their leader, Alawana, beforehand through Tinala and Binatuan. With the storm invoked, Mark's group was pretty much wet already. But it did not matter as the rain did not hinder them that much. Well, it was pretty much the same for Sinogo. The two opposing sides continued the battle. The others became audiences to the battle that would decide their fates afterward. Beams of light shot everywhere. Most of the beams came from Sinogo, who was still far from having any serious damage. His energy had yet to show signs of depleting either, and it felt like he could shoot his attacks indefinitely. On the other hand, Mark and the others were doing their best to deal some proper damage. Nonetheless, Sinogo was also struggling to fight the group as they grasped the patterns of the giant's attacks. Everyone watched in awe and fear. As the ancient texts said, godly beings of equal power could fight for days or months continuously without a clear winner. What they were watching might be comparable to the fights of the gods. But then, under everyone's watch, Sinogo tried to attack once more. And to everyone's surprise, the giant fell to the ground, creating a gigantic splash of mud and water. None of the audience could understand what happened immediately. Some even though that Sinogo began to weaken. But those with keen eyes, such as the eyes Magwayan and Alawana, understood what was going on. Sinogo immediately tried to stand up, but he was having great difficulty for some reason. The moment he stood up and tried to charge at his opponents, he fell down once again with a large splash. The giant did not understand what was happening either as he went on all fours. He then attacked with dozens of his beams instead. The beams forced Mark and the others to fly and dodge. At the same time, Chimetrice took the opportunity to charge and smashed Sinogo's back, causing the giant to fall once more. And the cause for Sinogo's current state was not because he became weakened. It was the rain, or to be specific, the muddy ground caused by the rain. The battlefield was already leveled into empty, vacant land with only corpses and craters. There were no trees or grass patches left in close proximity. Because of these factors, the rainwater gathered fast in this location, turning the barren land into slippery mud. Any creature with a weak sense of balance would succumb to such an environment, causing the mud to weaken their momentum and make them slip to the ground. Still, this was far from enough to kill the invincible Sinogo. But the setup was done after Chimetrice landed onto Sinogo's back with a bang. Chimetrice held his left hand, clenching it with force. He then punched Sinogo's back with all his might. The punch caused Sinogo to embed his body further in the mud below him, but dealing damage was the least of this punch's intended purpose. The left arm of Chimetrice was tree-like. The roots and branches began to move like vines and started to spread around Sinogo's body. Sinogo felt the slithering vines around his body and tried to shake Chimetrice off. He even shot several beams onto his back and also created a barrier of energy around his body. But all those did not faze Chimetrice even if he received quite a few injuries from Sinogo's retaliation. The vines continued to spread and grow. It was already late when Sinogo noticed that his range of movement became more and more restricted. Sinogo tried to wave his arms and legs and managed to remove the vines around his limbs. But that was all he could do as May and the two Dewatas kept him unable to raise his body from his fall. Amihan also helped, conjuring strong wind that pushed the giant's body to the ground as much as it could. It did not take long. Sinogo became literally rooted to the muddy ground. The most he could do was raise his head and saw Mark preparing for another attack. Sinogo's eyes dilated. He remembered the attack that Mark made just a while ago, and fear began to creep up his back. Death. Sinogo felt that he would die here. A powerful being like him, the one that ruled the waters of his territory, would be killed in this place. At the same time, Mark entered a trance. His magical energy might be almost depleted already, but his miasma was different. It never relied on his magical energy and only dwelled inside his body. As such, he could still use it. Mark took back the crystal staff from Tinala, who reluctantly returned the weapon. He then held the butterfly of knowledge once more and entered another trance. And there, Mark chanted. Like before, words entered Mark's mind. But as Mark spoke, it sounded garbled and unintelligible. Even so, everyone felt chills as the surroundings began to darken. A pitch-black cloud eerily surrounded Mark, spreading from inside his body. The thick miasma began emitting a chilling pressure in the surroundings, rivaling what Sinogo currently had. And there, Mark uttered 3 words that they could finally understand. Feast of Darkness. Everyone felt the horror when the cloud of miasma around Mark formed a gigantic mouth that extended towards the immobile Sinogo. Sinogo watched the monstrous mouth close in. It felt as if the mouth would lop his head off from his neck. This made Sinogo panic for the first time as he began struggling to undo the bindings of roots and vines around his body. However, the bindings were tightly held on, and everything that broke was quickly replaced by Chimetrice still standing on his back. But then, Sinogo's eyes widened, with flashes of scenes appearing in front of his eyes. And there, boom, an explosion of light occurred. Day 240 to 10:57 a.m. Mount Canlayan, Municipality of Codcod, Province of Negros Occidental. Using the combination of miasma, butterfly of knowledge, and the crystal staff, Mark had the chance to end this battle. That huge mouth made by thick miasma could have swallowed Sinogo entirely. This battle should have ended there. However, the worries of 4th and 19th were not unwarranted. They had the reason to. Before the Feast of Darkness touched Sinogo, another explosion of light bloomed around his body. The roots that bound his body were incinerated to ashes instantly. Chimetrice that stood at Sinogo's back was forced to retreat and not without injury. And the worst of it, Mark's attack disintegrated to nothingness. Mark suddenly felt the emptiness inside him. Miasma was different from a person's usual energy. It would not replenish on its own and grow by absorbing magical energy from others. Every time Mark released his miasma, it remained connected to him. And he could recall that miasma back into his body. In this clash, Mark felt a large amount of his miasma vanish. It felt as if he had lost something valuable but could not pinpoint what. Of course, he knew that it was miasma, but that was just how it felt for him. Mark clenched his fists and teeth as he stared at the blooming dome of light around Sinogo. He now understood the feeling when he stole the energy that Lord Cease accumulated. It was unpleasant. However, Mark was not inclined to sympathize with Lord Cease. After all, it was a battle. Gaining or losing something was inevitable. Still, it was unpleasant. Near the peak of Mount Canlayan, the eyes Magwayan, and the rest of Mark's group watched the battle. It would normally be impossible to see what was happening clearly from here since the battle was happening several kilometers away. However, 19th opened some sort of magical distortion that showed everyone around what was happening there. Even the mini cube had already landed, and everyone in Mark's group was present to watch the show. Well, the 2 sisters, Bella and Donna, were rather uncomfortable. It was the first time the 2 were around godly beings, and 3 at that. While watching, 19th sighed. Sinogo's potential is reaching its peak. It is getting far dangerous for them. And then, the dome of light exploded. It even caused the scene through the distortion to blur and shake. The sky cleared up, and the dark rain clouds disintegrated. The harsh weather Mark created was instantly cleared, and even the rainwater on the ground and the slippery wet mud dried up. It was all due to the searing heat that came from that explosion of light. In an instant, the advantage that Mark created by calling a storm was gone. It's better if they retreated now. 4th had the same opinion as 19th. But do you 2 really think that he will do that? Magwayan asked the 2 eyes only to be subjected to hostile and silent stares. She could only shrug, turning back at the scene they were watching. When the light exploded, the uncomfortable pressure spread out into the surroundings. Mark immediately flew in front of May and Amihan, making a shield of miasma to protect them. On the other hand, while Chemetrice managed to endure the force without getting blown away, the two Dewatas were thrown far after getting hit by the surge of energy. Tinala and Binatuan stabilized themselves after getting flung about 2 kilometers away. Nonetheless, it was clear that they received severe damage. The bodies of the two turned more ethereal, and their energies were far weakened to continue the battle. From here on out, this battle was left to Mark, May, Amihan, and Chemetrice. The explosion of light began to shrink. Slowly, Sinogo's figure emerged from the shrinking dome of light. Mark frowned. It was the same for the others. Sinogo had gone into another mutation. The giant man was still around 5 meters tall. However, the crocodile-like features of his body had spread out. He now looked like he was covered in golden scales and armor. The markings on his body were also glowing brightly. It was similar to how the markings of Mark's body glowed before. Flap. 3 pairs of gigantic golden wings opened wide on Sinogo's back. Ignoring his current appearance, Sinogo stared at Mark with no expression. The fear he had before was gone, and he saw Mark as nothing but an ant to be crushed beneath his feet. Sinogo's power was surging. His body became covered with a glowing aura while releasing surges of electricity around his body. The infected Sinogo had now gained increased control of the power he seized from the seal that confined him. It was still far from full control. It was not surprising, as a god's power cannot be wielded that easily. Still, as the supreme god of the sky, Kaptan ruled over the clouds, wind, lightning, and the weather. And Sinogo now gained a fraction of this power. Boom! Sinogo's wings flapped. The electricity around him surged. Then, his figure vanished, leaving nothing but an explosion of wind and dust from where he previously stood. Bam! A clash was heard midair. Mark created a thick barrier of wind in front of him before dragging May and Amihan out of the way. Sinogo crashed into the barrier of wind, causing that loud sound. But the barrier was immediately torn apart without effort. Fortunately, Mark already dragged May and Amihan out of the way as Sinogo passed through their initial position. Even so, the wind that was generated from each flap of Sinogo's wings caused their dodge to be unstable. But before Mark and the two gained stability, boom! A sonic boom was heard from above as Sinogo's figure came swooping down on the three. Tisk! Mark clicked his tongue as he pushed May and Amihan away, even pushing the two with a strong gust of wind. May and Amihan were flung away from Mark, who was currently Sinogo's sole target. Sinogo's right claw came swooping down on Mark as his body turned into a surge of mist, trying to dodge the fast attack. He intended to pass through the gaps of Sinogo's claws and counterattack at point-blank range. But to everyone's surprise, Mark was forced out of his misty state as he made contact with the aura around Sinogo's body. Bam! Mark was hit by the claw and was sent flying down to the ground. He crashed to the ground, causing a cloud of dust to form. Flapping his wings, Sinogo hovered in the sky, watching the cloud of dust below. He only had his sights on Mark, and it seemed that he did not want to repeat his mistakes before. Mark was subjected to Sinogo's sneak attacks twice and managed to survive both times. Sinogo always thought that Mark would not be a problem to him, but always returned to be the greatest threat he needed to face. Now, Sinogo was intent on killing Mark this time, and he would not let Mark out of his sight. Not even a single second. Seeing what happened, everyone watching was shocked. Mark was almost turned into meat paste before, and he was now hit by the far more empowered Sinogo. Sinogo then flapped his wings. The cloud of dust had yet to dissipate, but he was already getting impatient. He wanted to see what happened to Mark and prepared to soar down to the ground. Gurgur! May shouted as she fired her shooting moon blade at Sinogo. She could feel that Mark was still fine but definitely not in a perfect state. She could not just let Sinogo attack him again. The beam that May shot went straight to Sinogo. Sinogo tried to ignore the beam. But unexpectedly, It actually tore through the aura around his body and burnt his scales. Shinogo halted midway and turned to Mei. Pest. To everyone's surprise, Shinogo spoke using the spirit language. It was his first word, but it showed that he now had the ability to speak, albeit just a little. Shinogo waved his hand. The wind began to spiral in front of him and began to form into several small tornadoes. One would know that tornadoes were vertical or diagonal and not horizontal. That was just what Shinogo conjured. These horizontal tornadoes might be far smaller than an EF0 tornado. However, the spinning speed might even be comparable to an EF3, considering how they began to greatly affect the surroundings. And to everyone's horror, such a horrifying attack was aimed at Mei and Amihan. Mei began flying back, and Amihan was helping her by removing the air resistance in front of her. However, just flying to retreat would not do as the wind began to affect her flight. It was also questionable if her ability to travel instantly would help, considering the distance she could travel was far shorter than the size of the tornadoes. And as Shinogo stretched his claw forward, the tornadoes shot toward Mei's direction. At this time, a figure shot from the cloud of dust below. It was Mark. He looked dusty, but he did not seem injured at all, unlike before. Mark flew towards the trajectory of the tornadoes, turning into mist every now and then. Mark's intention was clear. He wanted to protect Mei. But to his dismay, the figure of Shinogo appeared in front of him. The giant was already attacking with his claw. Mark turned into a surge of black mist. This time, instead of passing through the gaps of the claws, he circled around it. The aura could force Mark out of the misty form, and there was no way he would touch it another time. Unfortunately, Mark's idea just would not work. As Shinogo's first claw missed, the other claw came crashing down on Mark. Mark tried shooting some laser beams using his photokinesis mental crystal, but it could not even pierce through the aura around Shinogo. And on the other hand, Mei was struggling to fly away as the tornadoes behind her began to pull her back. Worse, the spiraling wind seemed to follow her movements. It was when Chimetrice appeared, charging his way between Mei and the spiraling wind missiles. Shinogo's winds glowed as he summoned his own gust of wind. The wind from Chimetrice formed a wall that halted the tornadoes. But it seemed that the wall would not last long at all. Amihan watched the scene behind her. It was shameful that a wind spirit, like her, was being threatened by someone else's wind attack. She gathered her courage, jumping off Mei's shoulder. Amihan then flew towards Chimetrice, intending to help with her abilities. Below, Mark was hit by Shinogo's attack once more and came plummeting to the ground. However, he was barely injured. The transformation he got earlier surely enhanced his body's endurance. But most of all, Mark was using a cushion of wind to protect his body from Shinogo's physical attacks and when he plummets to the ground. Even the cloud of dust when he crashed down was created by the wind cushion instead of his body. Still, Mark was not without damage. The force from the impact would still rattle his insides. But the pain was the least of Mark's concerns. Mei and Amihan were in danger. Mark stared at the sky. Shinogo was just staring at him while Chimetrice and Amihan were doing their best to negate Shinogo's attack. Mei also tried shooting a couple of beams at the tornadoes, but it barely had any effect at all. BA dump. Mark's heart was pumping loudly. Was he getting nervous? What was this sense of powerlessness? At this time, Mark saw something on Shinogo's face. The bastard was smiling at him while glancing at the situation of Mark's companions. Shinogo was getting revenge for what happened in the previous rounds of this battle. Furthermore, he clearly knew that magical attacks would barely do anything to Mark and was using his claws instead. The situation reached a turnaround. The one cornered before was now the one with the advantage. It was this time. Mark took out his last crystal. The one he had never used before. Since it was something he had yet to discover, he wanted to try if it would at least bring any advantage. Mark stimulated the crystal. But to his dismay, it was not activating at all. Was it a dud? He should have tried it before instead of using it here now. What a blunder. It was a dilemma. But a crisis could bring forth an opportunity. Especially when the voices echoed inside the head of two individuals. Day 240 to 11 a.m. Mount Canlaon, Municipality of Codcod, Province of Negros Occidental. To everyone's dismay, the battle faced a complete turnaround. It was like what 4th and 19th warned them about. Sinogo's strength far surpassed what Mark's group could handle. It was just that Sinogo had yet to reach his peak potential in the earlier rounds. Now that Sinogo had reached his highest point, Mark's group was now the ones that were backed in the corner. May was currently being chased by dangerously spiraling winds. Although Chemetris was now blocking it with Amihan's help, it would not take long for the wall of wind they created to be broken. Even if May tried to use this opportunity to flee, the attack would just continue following her until she was sucked by the strong winds. And Mark, he was now blocked by Sinogo. None of his attacks managed to harm the giant at all, and he was heavily disadvantaged in terms of speed. If this continued, the only one who would make it out alive in this battle against Sinogo would be Chemetris. Furthermore, the escape would be extremely tedious. This scene unfolded as the strong winds shook the entire province. Even if it was just a fraction, the power of the sky god was not something to joke about. At Mount Canlaon, everyone watched the predicament while enduring the violent winds. They could only have worried or serene expressions while watching the scene before them. Worse, they lost the timing to safely retreat. 19th side. One wrong action would mean the end for them. 4th did not say anything. There was not a single tinge of excitement on the little girl's face. Contrary to the emotion she embodied as the eye of excitement. On the side, the members of Mark's group began to rack their brains for anything they could do. And among them, there was only one that could supposedly help. Spera, can't you open a portal for them to escape? Ilya inquired Spera, who had her eyes closed in concentration. I'm trying. Spera shouted in frustration, only to open her eyes a second later. But the interference is too strong. I can't open a portal anywhere near them. Same for me, Jaya grumbled at the side, tightly hugging Theodore in her arms. My telepathy had been cut off. Papa, Mama, Miracle called out loud. If not for Abigail not letting go of their youngest, she would have already run to try and help their parents. Abigail looked calm, but her eyes were worried and nervous. However, contrary to everyone else's states, Magwayan, Iola, and Ephelia watched in calmness. The goddess of the underworld even seemed to be smiling and anticipating something. The power of a god being could only be fought by another god being, Magwayan murmured. Are you going to wake up or let this end here in tragedy? No one heard Magwayan's whispered words, especially since the winds were blowing too strong. But what was she saying? On the other hand, Iola and Ephelia watched the distortion, showing Mark failing to use the unknown crystal. Ephelia was silent, but Iola voiced out some words. Not as the girl that lost her memories but as the keeper. Your Majesty, listen to the crystals. Back at the battlefield, Mark was gritting his teeth in frustration. Sinogo was tightly guarding his every move while slowly pushing his attack through the wall of wind created by Chemetris and Amihan. Furthermore, Mark was currently subjected to Sinogo's condescending stare. That stare, Mark was familiar with it. It was the same eyes that the monarch types he encountered before had. It was especially for the king types, who appeared to be the embodiment of arrogance and superiority. Furthermore, Sinogo was clearly executing his revenge on Mark for the things that happened earlier. And as if to torment Mark even more, Sinogo waved his claws. The spiraling winds that Sinogo and Amihan were struggling to block slowly moved towards each other. The horizontal tornadoes began to darken as more dust and debris were sucked in. In a few moments, those several tornadoes fused into one, and the wall of wind could barely block its sheer size. It did not reach an extremely large size, but the speed of the wind inside it was more than enough to grind large structures into debris. Worse, it began to tear the wall of wind even faster than before, absorbing the wall into its being. Both the tornado and the wall were made of the wind. The only difference was if the two sides were moving or spinning in the same or different directions. Mark racked his brains out to try and escape from this situation. But as they said, tricks did not matter against overwhelming strength. Mark knew as such, and the simulations he did in his head were all ending up in failure. In the air, Amihan and Chemetris did their best to block Sinogo's attack. Amihan even employed the things she learned from Mark, but to no avail. Her power was severely overwhelmed by Sinogo's control of the wind. There was no way that a little sylph like her would be able to contend against a power that came from the supreme god of the sky. But Amihan did not intend to give up. Even if she lost her life here, it would be worth it. Mark and May treated her as a family after she spent more than 100 years with no one by her side. And at this point, Amihan lost control of the wall of wind. Womb. Amihan's loss of control over the wall caused it to severely weaken. And there was no way that Chemetris would be able to continue blocking the empowered attack alone. The wall of wind they created instantly began to spin and became part of Sinogo's attack. Amihan was the first one subjected to the force of the wind, pulling her into its spiraling maws. And the small sylph had no way of resisting as she was thrown off her flight and was swallowed by the moving spiral of wind. Amihan was the first, and Chemetris was the second. And soon, May would end up the same. Mark's eyes widened as both Amihan and Chemetris became prey to the violent winds that Sinogo controlled. But to his relief, the two were still alive somehow. He could still feel their consciousness, although Chemetris seemed to be in a lot of pain. It was clear that Chemetris was protecting Amihan since she only seemed to be feeling afraid but still unharmed. On the other hand, May was yet to be swallowed by the wind. She used her all to fly as fast as she possibly could, with her body flashing with bright light here and there. However, the spiraling wind continued to chase and was rapidly catching up. And Sinogo was having fun watching their predicament. Mark clenched his fists. What was he supposed to do? But all of a sudden, a voice echoed in his head. "You're not giving up now, are you?" It was a familiar voice using a language born of Earth but had been lost in time. This voice. It was Keeper's voice. As Mark realized whose voice it was, scenes quickly flashed in his eyes. It was a scene where Keeper stood in front of him while being trapped in a cave. No, it was not Mark. This is Freed's memory. It was a fragment of Freed's memory. A time when one of their cards failed to work. Listen to the crystal. What does it want? Mark then saw Freed raise his hand, opening his enclosed fist. It was a crystal that failed to work for some reason. With that last scene, Mark snapped back to reality, realizing that he already raised his right fist and opened it in front of him. It was the same scene where a crystal failed to work for some unknown reason. Mark then noticed as he turned his arm. The Psy-crystal was glowing. It was not that the memory coincidentally appeared inside his mind. The Psy-crystal triggered it. It was not the first time that the Psy-crystal showed sentience. Not only the Psy-crystal, even the other crystals did the same. These items were definitely not sentient beings. However, they seemed to have their own will about things in their surroundings. It was the same this time, whether it be the memories or the will of the crystals. Listen to the crystal, you say. Mark said, holding the unresponsive crystal between his right index finger and thumb. He was sure that it did not mean that the crystal would magically speak to him. But as he looked at the crystal, he had one urge. In that memory, the crystal in Freed's hand had worked by using it in tandem with another crystal. But this one Mark held in his hand. To the surprise of everyone watching, Mark swallowed it. While his strange action would not mean much to the others, those who knew about the effects of the crystals did not expect Mark's action. After all, Mark had already consumed a few of these crystals. And each time, the pain due to the changes brought to the body by the crystals would intensify. It was not wrong to say that it could lead to death by circulatory shock if the pain exceeded the threshold of one's mind and body. Not to mention that there were crystals incompatible with each other and could cause conflict in the body and kill the user of the crystals. Yet, Mark took the risk. Mark grit his teeth. The pain began to spread to his whole body, especially his head. The previous time, it took Mark several hours to completely consume the lightning manipulation crystal he had. And it should also take a few hours this time. But time was not in Mark's favor. And the fastest way that Mark's body would adapt to the change was. Mark's blood churned, turning into sharp blades inside his body. And to everyone's shock, Mark fell onto his knees with his flesh and skin being torn and cut by his own blood. The wounds healed, but Mark kept repeating the process. At the same time, he used his remaining magical energy to use the butterfly of knowledge to further increase the process of healing and self-injury. Unexpectedly, Sinogo watched with interest as Mark began suffering. In his eyes, there was nothing else that Mark and his group could do. In the sky, the spiraling wind continued to chase the distraught May. She became even more worried as she felt Mark's current suffering. And inside the violent wind, Amihan opened her eyes. She finally noticed that she was still alive. Around her was a barrier of wind protecting her body. And Chemetris was shielding the barrier with his body. The wind sure was strong and violent that it was slowly slicing through the tough body of Chemetris. Amihan felt helpless. However, when she lost her parents due to the foreign humans, she was unable to do anything. But now, she was stronger than in the past. Although she did not know whether it would be of any help, Amihan began to gather all her energy around her body. It was when a familiar but also unfamiliar voice of a woman entered her ears, making her frantically look around. The voice asked Amihan, "Little embodiment of the wind. Why let the tainted wind restrict you?" "Who?" Amihan asked back, losing grasp of her gathered energy which could only disperse to nothingness. And as the little sylph asked the voice that question, the scene around her changed. Amihan was now flying in the middle of a dirt path inside a forest she had never seen before. Yet, the forest felt extremely familiar to her. Then, a beautiful woman appeared from one end of the path. The woman wore a white gown that fluttered lightly in the wind. The woman walked towards her, but her feet never touched the dirt below her feet. And when Amihan saw the woman's face, she was shocked. The woman then smiled. "Who am I?" "I am you." The woman answered the question as Amihan stared at that face that looked extremely similar to hers. To be exact, the woman continued to speak, looking at Amihan as if she had seen her lost child after a long time of separation. "You are a fragment of me." Day 240 to 11:05 a.m. Mount Canlaon, Municipality of Codcod, Province of Negros Occidental. Amihan stared at the woman in confusion. Her reaction was not surprising, considering her unstable mental state and the woman's cryptic words. Just now, she was in the middle of a deadly situation, and all of a sudden, she was in this place. And then, she met a woman sharing the same face and telling her words she could not comprehend. What did it mean when she said that she and Amihan were the same? Why did she say that Amihan was a fragment of hers? Wait. This is not the time for this. Amihan yelled out as she snapped out from her confusion. The person you chose to follow and his companions are in danger, is it? The woman asked in a gentle tone. If you know, then let me return. I am in this place because of you, right? Amihan lashed out. She did not know how she ended up in this place, but she was needed more back on the battlefield. You think that you are needed there, but how can you help in your current situation? The woman then vanished, and Amihan froze as the woman continued speaking behind her. Trapped inside a wind under someone else's control when the wind is supposedly your forte. Against the power of a god that ruled over the sky, you will face death. I don't care. Amihan turned towards the woman behind her. I already lost a family once. Even if I exchange my life for it, I don't want to lose another. Just let me go back. The demanding words and blaming tone of Amihan were met with a smile, however. By the time Amihan noticed, she received a gentle pat on her head before the woman walked past her. Amihan touched her head in surprise and followed the woman with her gaze. I am glad, the woman spoke with glee. We definitely are the same. The woman then faced Amihan with a beautiful but sad smile. I, too, sacrificed my life for someone else. That old man hated conflict, and as his followers and his children did not want him to change that. Thus, we all forced him to hide in safety, and we fought the enemies we had to face. Although we lost our lives, we managed to keep him safe. We are happy to fulfill our final goal, but he must have been sad losing all of us. As the woman recounted her past experiences, Amihan's eyes stared at the blank space in front of her. Scenes. Memories that she was not supposed to know flowed into her brain. The battle between the foreign gods and the eyes. Most importantly, the old man that the woman mentioned. Tears began to drip from Amihan's eyes. As the memories flowed smoothly in Amihan's head, she now understood what the woman meant by her words. Amihan was the woman, and the woman was Amihan. Then, Amihan voiced out, becoming uncertain of her own existence. But before Amihan became lost, a cool gentle wind blew around her. There is no need to question your existence, the woman smiled. You are I, and I am you. You are my fragment. But despite that, you are also you, and I am also I. Having the same root did not mean having the same existence, especially when you are the fruit. Then, am I your rebirth? Amihan asked. Given what you showed me so far, I would love to say yes, the woman replied. But no, you are not my rebirth. As a being from another realm, I cannot be reborn in this realm. You are just a fragment of me. My incarnation. That is the reason why. The woman added. We are the same, but also different. It might be confusing. But between worlds, there are still a lot of things we have yet to understand. Even gods are not omnipotent. Even the gods of creation did not know everything about the things they created. There are times that knowing is more than enough, and understanding is just an obstacle. Amihan continued to listen. And as the woman said, it was kind of hard to understand. However, she made sure to remember. Nonetheless, it made Amihan glad. She was the sylph named Amihan and not the woman in front of her. And this time, Amihan pulled the courage. We are fighting against a strong enemy. Can you help us? Amihan could feel that this woman was a strong being. And since she was pulled into this place by her, the woman was likely to offer her help. But the woman returned a gentle smile. You are mistaken. You did not need my help, the woman spoke as if reading Amihan's mind. You are my incarnate. A fraction of my strength dwells within you, sealed, for you to live a normal life. It should remain sealed even after you enter the cycle of souls. But there is a time when the seal would be broken. Amihan was then surprised as she felt a powerful energy dwelling within her. I believe you understand now. This meeting is the key to unlocking the seal. There is no need for such strength when living a normal life. But the power of a god could only be fought by another god.
If an incarnate was threatened by the power of another god, the seal would break. It will allow the incarnate to use a fraction of the power of their origin to protect themselves. In your case, you will be allowed to use the fraction of my power inside you. Amihan listened as she touched her left cheek. She could feel it was warm, and somehow, it was glowing with a yellowish golden light. Will the power be resealed after? Amihan asked. Resealing an incarnate's power required the direct contact of their origin. And in our case, that is impossible. The woman replied with a bitter smile. Then, you. Amihan looked at the woman with sad eyes. You should return. The time inside this place is faster but would not stop the time outside. And so, I bid you farewell. The surroundings went brighter, and Amihan could only close her eyes. That farewell had a deeper meaning. This would be the first and last time the two would meet since the woman was nothing but the memory left inside Amihan's soul. After the seal was broken, the woman's existence would finally be erased.
It was because the gentle goddess of the wind, Amihan, was long dead and was never reborn. On the ground, Mark's body continued to break and reconstruct. Even with the emotionless Mark, the pain on his face was impossible to hide. Nonetheless, his method was clearly working. As his body regenerated repeatedly, the changes in his body accelerated rapidly. And while Mark was in grave pain, Shinogo watched his suffering in glee. It was pure arrogance, thinking that whatever Mark was trying to do was nothing to his current power. However, even Shinogo did not want to waste time just watching. He made the giant wind spiral to spin and chase Mei faster. Mei, who was already having a hard time avoiding getting sucked into Shinogo's attack, struggled even more. Mark saw that and knew that there was no other choice. Boom. While in pain, Mark kicked the ground. He then unstably flew towards Shinogo with the crystals rotating around his arm. Mark's sudden action was unexpected and caused Shinogo's attack on Mei to slow down a little. And facing Mark, Shinogo raised his right hand. In the blink of an eye, another swat was already a few centimeters away from hitting Mark. But then, boom. Mark was thrown back, not by Shinogo's hand. An explosion occurred between Mark and Shinogo, causing the two to separate instantly. Mark had just used the combination of the flame manipulation crystal and wind manipulation crystal to cause an explosion between him and Shinogo. Not only did it make Shinogo's attack miss, but it gave Mark more time to distract Shinogo due to the smoke the explosion caused. The impact still made Mark land on the ground and immediately fall to his knees. He was still in pain, and the point-blank explosion just caused more injuries to him. But Mark did not care about the pain. Mei was in danger, not to mention that Chimetrice and Amihan were still trapped inside that wind spiral. Unfortunately, the smoke only distracted Shinogo for a second or two as he appeared in front of Mark instantly. Bam! Mark was flung away as Shinogo kicked him like a ball. The kick from a deity blessed with speed was terrifying. It did not seem that Shinogo exerted much force in that kick, but Mark was flung another kilometer away. Once Mark fell to the ground and landed, the impact would definitely give him grievous injuries. But to everyone's surprise, it did not happen. A strong wind blew around Mark in midair, stopping his fall. He then gently landed on the ground, only to see Mei and Chimetrice coming to support him. Everyone was confused. Chimetrice was swallowed by the horizontal tornado with Amihan, and Mei should still be being chased by that same attack. Yet, the two appeared where Mark was supposed to crash and arrived even before he landed. Shinogo was the one most confused. He turned to see the attack he created, and it was still there in the sky. But it was suspended in one place, chasing or trapping nothing. Gurgur, are you okay? Mei asked Mark in worry and sorry. In this late stage of this fight, she became more of a piece of baggage than help. I'm fine, Mark replied. My arms are broken again, though. Can you help me hold it? Like what Mark said, his arms were dangling with broken bones. He used his arms to block that kick, which caused the injury. Mei immediately helped Mark hold his arms in place as they began to heal. Chimetrice also stood in place, recovering from the cuts he received from being trapped inside the wind spiral. His injuries aside, Mark turned his attention to someone else. It was Amihan, flying between the group and Shinogo. Yellowish gold markings appeared on her left cheek and shoulder, glowing brightly with her wings. Most of all, Amihan was releasing a familiar pressure on her surroundings. It was a familiar pressure of a godly being. Who would have thought that a small sylph like Amihan would be able to exude such a powerful aura? A sylph that was supposed to be one of the weakest spirits of nature. A sylph that did not even have the greenish hair that everyone in their race had. To sylphs, the color of their hair signified how strong their magical energy was. And Amihan, a sylph with black hair, should be among the weakest of the weakest. Yet, Amihan flew with her glowing body, exuding an aura that could compete with Shinogo. It was an unfathomable scene, if not a miracle. However, it was a misjudgment. Amihan's hair was not black because she had weak magical energy. It was black because of her true identity. Looks like she successfully awakened. Magwayan spoke with a smile to everyone's surprise. Hey, what is going on here? Fourth turned to the goddess of the underworld to interrogate her. But Magwayan used this opportunity to snarkily reply. As the protectors of this world, why do you not know? The two eyes could only frown. Yes, they did not know. After all, the godly aura around her only meant that it was done by a god. Even the eyes did not have full superiority toward the foreign gods, after all. If you two knew nothing, just watch, then, Magwayan triumphantly smiled. Let us see how strong the awakened incarnation of the goddess of the wind is. Day 240 to 11:08 a.m. Mount Canlayan, Municipality of Kodkod, Province of Negros Occidental. The sudden change in the situation caused some commotion in the audience. It was not wrong to say that it was just a matter of time before Mark and his group were defeated. May was being chased by an attack that she could barely outrun. Amihan and Chemetris were swallowed by the same attack. And Mark was barely capable of moving after swallowing the crystal. The only thing that kept them from dying was Sinogo's arrogance, watching his opponents as they struggled for their lives. But all of a sudden, all of Mark's group were safe. They were injured and tired but out of the predicament nonetheless. And it was all due to the small, Sylph. A creature that was supposed to be barely able to do anything against someone with a god's power. With two godly auras contending, the pressure on the battlefield increased. One would think it doubled, but it was more than that. If a regular person, even most magical creatures, stepped into the battlefield at this moment, they would immediately freeze out of instinctual fear. Chemetris aside, it was fortunate that Mark and May were unique individuals. If not, they would be severely affected just by staying on the battlefield. Everyone was surprised to see this sudden change in the situation. Those watching all saw Mark do something and would not be surprised if the change was caused by him. But no, the change was caused by the most unexpected individual. Even Mark was strictly paying attention to Amihan. He was also surprised. He never noticed a single clue that Amihan concealed such power. Since he had miasma, he became more sensitive to magical energy and did not see anything strange on Amihan. And back in the base, Annika, who could see energies within an individual, never mentioned anything strange about Amihan. In fact, Amihan was initially the weakest Sylph that Mark had met and seen. But now, she was clearly the strongest among them. Of course, Amihan shared the name of the Tagalog goddess of the wind. But having such a name was never a recognizable clue, as parents tend to give popular or powerful names to their children, hoping to share the fates and future of those individuals. Not to mention, Mark did not know whether the godly aura Amihan was releasing came from that very same goddess or someone else. On the other hand, Chemetris stared at Amihan. The ant, smaller than the others, was the one to retaliate now. He felt her exuding a powerful aura but did not know that it was a godly aura similar to his. And, compared to Mark, he did not feel afraid. Instead, he felt more and more excited. In Sinogo's mind, if he devoured this winged ant, he would become far stronger. He could not wait. Bam! Sinogo caused a sonic boom behind him as he flew down towards Amihan. But then, shwoom! Sinogo froze a second in the sky before his body was violently flung to the ground. At the same time, dust and wind exploded as the force that pushed Sinogo to the ground crashed with him. Everyone was shocked, while some cheered. Not everyone saw or realized what happened, but the Sylphs and those familiar with magical energy felt a strong magical wind push Sinogo down from the sky. Sinogo crashed to the ground in an unsightly manner. The impact would have been more than enough to turn people into meat paste. But, of course, not Sinogo. While the violent wind continued to try and pin Sinogo to the ground, Sinogo slowly rose from his fall. He was clearly confused and agitated by what happened, but that was all. His body did not have a single injury, although he was kind of struggling to stand up once more. And then, shwoo-oom! The wind blew stronger. Everyone watched as, in a straight line, several kilometers behind Sinogo, Everything was being stripped off the ground. Large trees flew to the sky while the grass and other plants were ripped off the ground without resistance. Even rocks were not exempted as they were flung off the ground they rest on. It was as if a giant hair trimmer passed through Earth's surface and instantly trimmed its hair up to the scalp, leaving a bald line of skin. However, the only one to be able to endure the violent blow was the one attacked by it, Sinogo. Sinogo planted his feet on the ground while enduring the strong winds. He was uninjured, and the aura enveloping his body blocked the winds from directly hitting him. But it did not mean that the force created by the wind would vanish. If one was to block an attack with a shield, the attack might not directly hit the person's body. However, he could still be blown together with the shield he held. Sinogo was pinned down and was unable to move. The strong wind he was facing was not as sharp as his tornadoes but blew far stronger. His current state could be compared to a person standing in the middle of a flooded river and trying to go against its flow. At this time, Amihan turned to Mark and May. With Sinogo pinned down, they could have a short conversation. Master. Mistress. I'm going. Leave him to me for now, Amihan said before turning to Chemetrais. Thank you for protecting me earlier. Chemetrais shook his head, indicating that it was no problem, while Mark asked Amihan. Can you defeat him? The question made Amihan show a bitter smile. I don't really know. That's why, Master. Hurry up and help, okay. That lack of confidence, Amihan surely was still Amihan. Ha. Mark sighed. I'll do my best. Be careful, okay. Be careful. May wished the same. Yeah. Amihan smiled as she turned around to face Sinogo. Sinogo was already in the process of breaking Amihan's attack that pinned him there. In another second or two, it would be his turn once more. But Amihan would not let that. A sudden gust of wind blew from all directions and converged towards Sinogo. Amihan then made motions with her arms as if gathering something into her hands. Her movements caused the wind to blow stronger towards Sinogo. And at the end, Amihan made a throwing motion with her arms, as if throwing something heavy towards the east. Everyone watching was surprised. Sinogo had already broken through the attack pinning him and was ready to charge. But he suddenly lost his footing, and Sinogo was flung up to the sky towards the east. Sinogo spun uncontrollably as his body lost control in the air. Amihan then gave one last glance at her companions before her whole body glowed, and she chased after Sinogo. It was clear to everyone what just had happened. Amihan brought the battle above the Tanyon Strait between the island provinces of Negros and Cebu. It was the very same waters that sealed Sinogo for generations. And now, the next round of this battle would happen above these cursed waters. Here, there would be less destruction that would ensue during the battle. There would be fewer unintended deaths, and the two could fight freely. In the sky above the Tanyon Strait, Sinogo controlled the wind around him and stabilized his body. But Sinogo did not have time to rest. He turned back only to see the golden light charging in his direction. Of course, that light was no other than Amihan. Well, she was not charging at Sinogo. She was actually gathering as much around her as she flew. Sinogo waved his hand and flapped his gigantic wings. He gathered his own wind, making several spirals, and shot it at Amihan. This scene looked ominous as the spirals actually sucked in clouds as they formed. On the other hand, Amihan suddenly stopped with her hands pushing forward. Woom! Woom! The deafening sound of air exploding could be heard for miles away. In an instant, the spirals Sinogo created dispersed after crashing into what seemed to be a giant invisible wall. Furthermore, the wall went straight toward Sinogo. Sinogo flapped his wings and used his speed to avoid the incoming attack. This was the first time Sinogo had to avoid something ever since he reached his current form. Amihan's attack that did not hit anything flew straight to the sky, tearing the clouds before dispersing into the atmosphere. Unfortunately, Amihan's speed was still below Sinogo's. When her attack vanished, Sinogo already appeared beside her to catch her. But Amihan did not feel afraid. The gigantic hand that could crush him effortlessly did not faze her now, enabling her to react to Sinogo's speed and attack. Boom. A Mihan caused the wind around her to explode, and it actually pushed Sinogo's hand away. It even left a slight tear on the aura enveloping Sinogo's hand. But Amihan did not end there. With Sinogo's hand pushed away, his body was defenseless. Amihan punched the air, and a large clump of air formed and solidified before hitting Sinogo's stomach like a cannonball. Gahek. Sinogo let out an unsightly sound as his body was, once again, flung up to the sky. The giant stabilized himself, holding onto his aching stomach. He was actually damaged by his prey's attack. It was unbelievable for Sinogo. And Sinogo was enraged. Sinogo began releasing a powerful aura to his surroundings. The sky darkened once again as if a violent storm was brewing. Lightning flashed, and thunder roared. The wind then blew stronger and stronger, and the waters below surged. The giant waved his hand. Several branches of lightning fell from the sky towards Amihan. Air would not be able to block light and electricity. It might be able to scatter the two, but definitely not in this case where the lightning was caused by a powerful being. However, Amihan flew towards the water below. While her speed was not as fast as Sinogo's, it was still impressive. She was using wind to push her body while removing air resistance in front of her. She really was flying fast and reached near the water before the lightning could reach her. It seemed unbelievable that Amihan could outrun the lightning, but she just did. And upon reaching a certain distance from the water, Amihan waved her hands up as she continued flying away. It was when several pillars of spiraling waters rose from the water and blocked the strikes of lightning. Amihan just created twisters above the surface of the water, which caused it to suck water in. The twisters turned into water spouts, turning into good conductors of electricity and diverted the attacks from Amihan. Pure water might not conduct water, but the strait's water was never pure in the first place. With Sinogo's attack failing to reach Amihan, it was now her turn to attack. Waving her hands like a dance, the water spouts she created to block the previous attack converged into one. It became a gigantic waterspout that was even bigger than the tornado that trapped her and Chemetrice before. Amihan caused it to spin faster and faster, causing everything near the coast could already feel the force within the waterspout. The water in the strait also began to spin as it followed the force of the waterspout. It was such a horrendous sight, and the one behind it was just a small sylph. But when everyone thought that it was already done, Amihan clenched her fists. The temperature inside the water spout decreased drastically. The water began forming into needles and blades of ice, spinning violently inside the spiraling wind. It felt like anything that entered that waterspout, no, the icy tornado, would become shredded to pieces. And then, the terrifying weather phenomenon that Amihan created started moving towards Sinogo. Of course, Sinogo was not stupid to just let himself get hit. He planned to avoid it. After all, his speed was incomparable to a measly spinning wind. Or that was what Sinogo thought. When Sinogo was about to flap his wings to fly away, Amihan turned her back on Sinogo and punched the air behind her. Bam! Urk. Sinogo felt the very same sensation when Amihan's attack hit his stomach. This time, it was on his back. His wings instantly felt numb from pain. And worst of all, Sinogo was flung straight towards the icy tornado coming his way, unable to fly away. In an instant, Sinogo was swallowed by it. Day 240 to 11:12 a.m. Tanyon Strait, Region 7, Central Visayas. It was less than an hour before noon. The sun should be up and shining in the sky. But within the vicinity of Tanyon Strait and the nearby coastal areas, it was as if there was an ongoing storm. The sky was dark, and the winds blew strong. Lightning flashed repeatedly, and thunder roared one after another. The waves within the waters moved violently, and they swallowed the areas near the beaches. Since the apocalypse began, several strange phenomena have started happening in many parts of the world. Many of which were events akin to doomsday scenarios. And this time, Something similar was happening in the body of water between the island provinces of Cebu and Negros. But who would have thought it was caused by two powerful beings fighting? Not to mention two individuals that commanded the powers of gods in the myths. Of course, those who did not know would not think of such a possibility. And rationally thinking, such a thing was not possible at all. Yet it was happening. Back in the sky above the center of the Tañon Strait, the icy waterspout continued to spin. Inside the violent winds, Sinogo struggled to maintain his flight while shielding his body with his aura. With the wind blowing violently inside the waterspout, anything in flight would have a hard time. And because of the shard of ice flying inside, it was impossible to maintain flight at all. The shards of ice flew at alarming speeds. Anything that entered it would likely end up shredded to pieces. Even Sinogo was struggling. Not only that he could not fly stably, but also because his aura was being slowly shaved off. They said that the eye of a tornado was the safest compared to its edges. However, it was not the case here. With the shards of ice hitting each other, most of them would end up bouncing off towards the center. The vortex of the water spout became where the shards of ice converged, turning it into a meat grinder. It did not take long, and Sinogo received his first wounds. The shards of ice repeatedly shaved away the aura shielding Sinogo's body until parts of it vanished. Although the aura was restored as soon as it could, the slight opening was more than enough for the shards to inflict injuries. Of course, the wounds Sinogo received were far from something that could kill him. Nonetheless, staying trapped inside the waterspout for a prolonged period might cause his demise. And as one would expect, Sinogo gave up on defense. No, it was definitely something unexpected. In this situation, one's reflex was to protect their vitals. Even Sinogo initially did as he protected his head and body with his arms and wings. It was his action, even if his body was protected by that film of magical aura. And now that Amihan's attack was actually able to damage him, Sinogo's current actions became even more irrational. Sinogo's aura vanished and was restored repeatedly. However, his body was also increasingly injured every millisecond that passed by. It was when the space around Sinogo began to shake. It was not only Amihan who could control the wind. He was the same. The space around him shook as he took control of the wind inside the waterspout Amihan created. Sinogo's control of the wind was clearly inferior to that of Amihan's. Nonetheless, it was more than enough to divert any incoming damage. And as Sinogo converged his energy and released everything in an instant. Boom! A loud explosion of air was created as Sinogo tore the entire waterspout apart, scattering strong winds, water, and ice in every direction.
Wah! Amihan was also blown away, only managing to stabilize herself after getting thrown a kilometer away. The two were separated with a great distance between them. At this distance, it would not be surprising if Sinogo lost visuals of the small Amihan. But that was not the case. The two were not using their eyes to sense each other but the strong magical energy they were releasing. Sinogo was wounded. Even if his aura had already been restored, the wounds on his body were clear for anyone to see. Unfortunately, Sinogo did not have the ability to heal himself, which was in Amihan's favor. Ignoring his wounds, however, Sinogo chased after Amihan. He would not let the pest have the chance to make another powerful attack. Amihan, on the other hand, stared at the incoming Sinogo. It was not like she was unfazed, but she had no choice but to continue fighting. The sylph waved her hands, and the wind around her danced. She then flew at speeds faster than she had ever in her entire life and avoided Sinogo's frightening charge. Missing his target, Sinogo turned his waist around, throwing bolts of lightning towards Amihan, who now flew above him. In this position, there was no way Amihan would be able to use the water below to shield her body from the lightning Sinogo conjured. As expectedly, Amihan could only try to evade the attacks. She was almost hit several times. Fortunately, although her body felt the electricity passing in the air, she was able to evade the sudden attacks and remained unharmed. ***** On the previous battlefield, everyone arrived at the location where Mark and Symmetris were waiting. With Amihan shifting the battle somewhere else, the others could safely reunite with Mark. In addition to the members of Mark's group, Magwayan and the Eyes, a few more individuals joined in. First was the three Dewatas of Mount Canlone. And surprisingly, the black-dressed Dewata from Mount Madia as Silam had arrived. The moment everyone arrived, Mark's attention was already on someone. "Do you have to stare at me like that?" Magwayan returned the stare with a knowing smile. "About Amihan. You also know about it," Mark replied. No one interrupted the clash of stares. Everyone here knew the fault that lay on Magwayan here. Even the newly arrived Silam, who shared the same blame, just looked the other way. The two clearly knew Amihan and her connection to the goddess of the wind. However, the two never told anyone, including the person in question. This would not have been an issue. However, Magwayan clearly supported May and Amihan's intention to join the battle because of this reason. "Why do you have to question me as if I did something wrong?" Magwayan shrugged. "My intentions saved your lives, mind you." Mark could not refute that. As Amihan awakened her concealed power, it saved Mark, May, and Symmetris from immediate harm. That aside, 19th interjected. "Taking that crystal in front of your enemy is such a dangerous move. Why would you think of doing that?" "Do I have any other choice?" Mark replied. "Some goddess informed me about Amihan, I wouldn't have done it." The blame returned to Magwayan in the end. She started to feel annoyed getting all the blame. But Mark also had a point there. "This is why we warned you before." Fourth grumpily sighed. "It's too early for you to take on that guy. You're lucky that Sylph is actually someone's incarnation. If not, things could have gone worse." "Are we getting back to this discussion?" Mark replied to Fourth. "I already told you two that we can't just retreat from here." Fourth could only stare grumpily at Mark. His head was too hard to change his mind. It was not like his reason was not valid. But still, Fourth felt annoyed at Mark. "And why are you here?" Mark asked someone who was not supposed to be in this place. "There is no way I should not. The entire region is already affected by what is happening here," Silam replied. "If this place fell, the next would be our home. In the least, I could prepare my people to leave if the worst came." It was true. While Mar and the others could not see it, the entire Visayas could already feel that something was wrong. In fact, droves of infected started moving towards this location, attracted by the strong magical fluctuations in the area. On the other hand, animals were already fleeing the vicinity, trying to escape the possible catastrophe they could face if they stayed. And for the magical beings, the weak ones could only shiver. The fluctuations released by the battle caused their entire existence to become unstable. The only ones who could endure the situation were the ones gathered in Mark's location. "You two want to go back?" Mark shifted his attention to two other people. It was the sisters, Bella and Donna. The sisters were clearly uncomfortable. Unlike everyone else here, the two were basically just regular people. Fortunately, the presence of the Eyes kind of negated the direct effects of the auras coming from Sonogo and Amihan. If not, they should have passed out already just from the pressure emitted in the surroundings. Bella and Donna looked at each other. In the current situation of the battle, there was nothing that the two could help with, however. "Can we stay?" The younger, Donna, asked Mark. "We are already here. I want to see how this ends. It's just a once-in-a-lifetime event, right?" "I want to see it too," Bella added. Donna was a free-spirited woman, and she was quite courageous. Her reply was not surprising. The more unexpected thing was that her older sister agreed with her. "Then, suit yourselves." Mark nodded. He had no qualms with the two staying here. It would not change anything whether they stay or escape. At this time, the battle in the Tanyon continued to rage. With the help of 4th and 19th, everyone around Mark could watch everything that was happening. "She's holding out well," 19th complimented Amihan's current prowess against Sonogo. "She is using her small stature to her advantage." Normally, the larger ones had the size advantage. In this battle, however, Emihan had the advantage as the smaller one. Because Emihan was small, she was hard to hit even with supposedly precise attacks. It was like how it was hard for a human to hit a fast-flying fly. If Sonogo wanted to hit Emihan, he needed to create wide attacks that would affect a large area. Sonogo would have been able to make such using wind attacks. However, Emihan had greater command and control over the wind. Wind attacks became ineffective against her. Most of all, Sonogo wanted to eat Emihan for her magical energy. At least, for now, the giant was trying to kill Emihan without destroying her whole body to dust. But who knows how long would it stay like this? Sonogo could go impatient and just start a full-blown attack at Emihan without regard for the result. At this time, Symmetris stood up with Elia clinging to his arm. "I have already recovered," Symmetris declared. "I am joining the fight once more." Elia let go of Symmetris, and no one tried to stop him. Everyone was also counting on Symmetris to end this battle. With a strong flap of his wings, Symmetris soared to the sky once more. He then flew towards the east, where the battle between Sonogo and Emihan ensued. Seeing that scene, Mark sighed. He was the only one left that could join this fight, however, he was still not ready. Mark clenched his right arm. He could feel his whole body churning in pain. In fact, it was rather strange. When Mark swallowed the second lightning crystal he acquired, he also felt like being electrocuted, and lightning bolts repeatedly flashed out of Mark's body. But now, Mark was only feeling pain after swallowing the dud crystal. This pain was only brought by his self-harm and the ongoing changes inside his body. While Mark had those thoughts, the space suddenly shook. It surprised everyone, even the eyes, as all of them looked at the sky. All of a sudden, Mark felt his body churn. He gazed at the sky, looking at the familiar formation of the swirling clouds. Finally, the power from the crystal surged inside Mark's body. It forced everyone to retreat, but the one shocked the most was Fourth. "No way. This presence, when did you get that bastard's power?" Fourth shouted in shock as she felt the familiar presence and power getting emitted from Mark's body. Day 240 to 11:15 a.m. Barangay Yule, Municipality of Vallehermoso, Province of Negros Oriental. The agitation in Fourth's behavior was clear, and it was not surprising. From Mark's body, the strong presence and power of someone Fourth hated were being released. Mark's absorption of the new crystal and the power inside it reached past the middle mark. And now, his body was about to undergo the final changes. This caused the energy inside his body to start circulating and transforming body. And Fourth definitely recognized this flow of energy. There was no way she would forget the presence of the troublesome and hateful demon deity that she had failed to eliminate since immemorial. The Earth Demon, Teray. This troublesome entity escaped Fourth's judgment and hid from the eyes for millenniums. Fortunately, the troublesome entity was killed by Mark during their fight with the Tamawas. It was such a welcomed coincidence, especially now that two of Earth's dimensions had already fused. Still, Fourth never expected that Mark actually acquired that troublesome Earth Demon's power. Fourth did not know whether having such power would be a good or bad thing for Mark. However, if it worked out, if he could control this power, Teray's unique power might be one of the best things that Mark could acquire. Everyone surrounding Mark started to feel the strange energy Mark was emitting. It included the two sisters, who were not really that accustomed to feeling magical energy, yet they could feel the energy around Mark. That was how strong and strange it was. Puff. But to everyone's surprise, Mark suddenly vomited blood. Gurgur. Papa. May and the girls approached Mark as quickly as they could. This scene was completely unnatural as this would be the first time they had seen Mark vomit blood after becoming a mutator. Master. Aphelia was also severely worried, thinking that swallowing that crystal might have been a bad action. She did wish that Mark would listen to the crystals, but she never thought swallowing it would be the answer. To the side, 19th silently watched Mark. The eye of interest Shore was quite interested in the changes that Mark was currently experiencing. The other members of Mark's group were showing worry. Silam and Magwayan watched at the side without making any noises. As for the three Dawatas of Mount Canlone, they watched Mark with wariness. Well, rather than just Mark, it was not wrong to say that they were wary of everyone present. They did receive help, but it did not mean that they would completely trust these strangers. The three were rather surprised to see Magwayan and Silam, however. "Hey, you still good?" Fourth asked, trying to take a peek at Mark's face from the side. "Do you really have to ask that?" Mark responded, annoyed, as he wiped the blood from his lips. It was clear that Mark was not okay. The pain just suddenly spiked, twice or thrice as painful as before. Although he should take advantage of his regeneration to hasten the changes in his body, he already chose to stop. Additional pain in his current state would likely cause more harm, as he was in a state where he could faint if he had a lapse in his concentration. The sudden spike in the pain he felt in his body was also the reason Mark lost control of his blood and vomited a mouthful of it. That sign was more than enough to show how much pain he was in, considering that he did not even bleed after getting swatted by Sonogo and breaking most of his muscles and bones earlier. Enduring the pain in his body, Mark asked the two eyes, while pointing at the sky. "Say, that would go and smite me again, won't it? I rather not have that kind of treatment right now." "Unfortunately, what you wanted is not possible," 19th replied. "A tribulation is a fair trial for those trying to surpass things defying existence itself. And defying existence is what you were good at." Tisk. Mark clicked his tongue as he gazed at the sky. Once Mark fully integrated with the crystal he swallowed, the clouds in the sky would immediately fire a lightning bolt at him. It was a good opportunity for him to get another lightning crystal, but he was not in the best condition to do so. Not to mention that a large amount of his miasma got erased. He did not know whether he got enough to block and absorb the lightning strike. Mark might be able to endure the tribulation, but he would end up in a state where he would not be able to rejoin the battle immediately. Closing his eyes, Mark started to feel his body. He could feel his muscles pulsating painfully. It was as if the crystal did not only give him another magical ability but was actually changing his body to a genetic level. Considering that he already had the ability to mutate and adapt to catalysts entering his body, the process was proceeding rather smoothly despite the pain. If Mark did not have this mutator ability, the very same ability that saved him from being consumed and killed by the deity of bloodsheds, miasma, that sudden spike in pain should have rendered Mark unconscious. Mark opened his eyes, sensing that the process was nearly done. He struggled to get up as the sky started to rumble. "Gerger, are you leaving already?" May asked Mark while helping him stand up. "Yeah. It's almost over," Mark replied. "Besides, I can't face that with all of you around me." "You're worried about the tribulation just now," 19th chimed in. "Did you already resolve yourself to face it?" At 19th's question, Mark smirked despite his suffering. "I'm not really keen on facing that in my current condition." Then Mark stared at Sinago's figure in the distance. "I'm going to do something I'll call a pro-Shenxia move." These words caused everyone around Mark to look at him with confusion. ******************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************* Tanyon Strait, Region 7, Central Visayas. The battle above the waters of Tanyon Strait continued and became more and more earth-shaking. Lightning bolts rained from the sky and shot from Sinago's hands. Blades of wind and small tornadoes were conjured with the movements of Amahan's dance. And with Chemetris joining the fray once more, his evil aura soared as he used different attacks to try and take down the infected giant. The three godly beings were locked in such a battle. Amihan was almost hit several times, and a single attack could damage her severely. Chemetris was the same, but he was already hit by a few lightning bolts. But he could rely on the sturdiness of his body. It was something far surpassed even some of the gods that existed in the past. Sonogo, on the other hand, had no choice but to face the barrage of attacks coming his way. He could evade most of it using his speed, but Synago's gigantic body, despite its size being smaller than before, was still easier to hit than Amahan's small stature. And since the air was everywhere, Synago could not escape Amahan's attacks entirely. His protective aura had been chipped away and was penetrated several times already, leaving wounds on his body. If this continued, while it would take some time, Amihan could win this fight. That was, of course, if Synago did not manage to hit Amihan even just once. Just one hit in this situation could turn around. And it was Chimethris's duty to stop that from happening as much as possible. While the three were locked in their battle, they did not notice someone sneaking below them. Using the photokinesis mental crystal, Mark hid his body with optical camouflage. He then flew unstably just a few inches above the violent waves of the waters of Tanyon Strait. In the sky right above Mark's position, the clouds brewing the tribulation followed. These strange clouds would have been noticeable, but the dark clouds caused by the battle completely concealed it. Not to mention the rumbling sounds it exuded sounded no different from the thunder caused by Synago's lightning attacks. Mark watched the battle above him while unstably maintaining his flight. He noticed that compared to most magical attacks he had seen from the sylphs before, Amihan was using quite a variety. And this was not because Amihan gained a fraction of the power of the Tagalog goddess of the wind. It was because Mark taught Amihan many things regarding wind and even its composition. And to say, Amihan also watched some animes with Mark, where some characters used wind attacks, which greatly influenced how she battled with her abilities in the present. After all, the magical attacks of creatures in this country were bland and undeveloped. For sylphs, it was always wind spirals and wind blows and nothing else. It was nice to see that Amihan was already deviating from the stagnant path of her race. URG. Mark groaned. The final stages had arrived. As sneakily as possible, Mark positioned himself below, and using the wind manipulation mental crystal, Mark sent his voice to Amihan and Chimethris, who were surprised. Even so, the two followed his instructions. It was to try and constrict Synago to one place in a few seconds or so, then get away from the giant. The two were confused as to why Mark gave such instructions, but they trusted him. With the movements of her hand, Amihan gathered the wind in the surroundings, and as she crossed her arms and clenched her fists, the winds around Synago blew strong, creating a wall of wind blades, encasing the giant inside. Synago felt the danger and tried to break the cage. However, Chimethris, with his own abilities, helped strengthen it. After all, Chimethris also had the ability to control and manipulate winds, although not to the extent that Amihan could. And if it was not enough, Chimethris hid his presence. Then, every time that Synago managed to tear a part of the wind cage, Synago would appear and attack the giant back inside. Synago was trapped, though the giant was confused as to why the blades of wind did not seem to attack him. And below, Mark gave the final signal to Amihan and Chimethris, forcing the chimera to finally fly away from the wind cage. Then, THHOOM. A pillar of lightning shot down from the sky, and to everyone's surprise, Synago was directly in its trajectory. The instant that the pillar of lightning touched the wind cage, it was broken instantly. Synago felt the threat and tried to escape. However, out of nowhere, something grabbed onto the base of Synago's wings. It halted his attempt to escape. It was Mark who charged toward Synago at the last moment and removed his optical camouflage. And the two were instantly swallowed by that giant pillar of lightning from the sky. Everyone watched in awe at that pillar of lightning. It was akin to a sword that shot from the heavens to smite those below it. This was not the first time for Chimethris and Elia to lay witness to such a terrifying scene. The two were present when Mark received the previous trial of the heavens when he reached the unprecedented level as an empath. But even at that time, the pillar of lightning was not this threateningly strong. And if one did not know, they would feel confused at the strength of this tribulation, but Mark and the eyes knew the reason. A tribulation should only be faced by the person receiving the trial of the heavens. If someone tried to interfere, it would grow stronger and try to eliminate those interlopers. In this case, Mark forcefully dragged Sonogo into the position of the interloper, enhancing the strength of the tribulation, and letting it try to destroy Sonogo. Everyone lost sight of Mark and Sonogo for a second or two. It was just how bright that pillar of lightning was. And then, boom! A strong explosion occurred, covering the large area with smoke, vapor, and residue of magical energy. As the pillar of lightning vanished, a figure emerged from that explosion. To everyone's dismay and worry, the giant figure of Sonogo appeared. His protective aura was waning, and his whole body was covered in wounds and burns. One of his 6 wings was also torn off, while the remaining ones were torn and burnt. It must be the gravest injury he received since he gained his current form. Emihan and Shemetris immediately moved. However, it was not to attack Sonogo but to find Mark amidst that explosion. But before the two could do so, crackle! Loud crackling sounds were heard, and sparks of electricity began shooting out of the remaining residue of the explosion. And there, they heard, grr, bam! Sonogo was suddenly blown away as another giant figure emerged from the smoke. It was a 4 to 5 meter tall figure, clad in black metallic armor and adorned with 6 dragon-like wings. The giant figure stared at Sonogo as electricity crackled all over his body. Day 240 to 11:21 a.m., Tanyon Strait, Region 7, Central Visayas. Everyone was surprised to see the sudden emergence of another giant into the battle. When the new giant emerged from the smoke and attacked Sonogo, almost all of them did not consider the possibility of it being Mark. After all, it appeared without warning, and Mark definitely did not have this kind of ability. But when they noticed the familiar-looking armor of the giant, it only then registered in their minds. There was only one person who could conjure such armor. And it was Mark, using his blood. However, compared to Mark's usual workmanship, the appearance of the armor looked rather rough and somewhat natural. Still, only Mark was present with Sonogo when the pillar of lightning fell from the sky. The two were swallowed by that explosion. Sonogo was already out after receiving injuries, and only Mark was left to appear from that cloud of smoke. Furthermore, he attacked Sonogo immediately, right after getting out of the smoke from the explosion. This new giant could only be Mark. The only people who immediately recognized it was Mark, without a shred of doubt, were May, Magwayan, and the 2 eyes. May always had this strange way of finding and identifying Mark. There was no way she would not recognize him. On the other hand, the eyes knew of Teray and his most unique ability and had foreseen this result beforehand. Lastly, Magwayan, who had more experience than everyone here, would not be surprised by these kinds of things. From the distortion that 4th and 19th opened to watch the battle, everyone stared at Mark's current form. As everyone watched closely, Mark's current appearance was strikingly similar to his pure demon transformation but enlarged several times. However, the resemblance could not be seen at first glance due to the changes that occurred, especially with how his body was not proportionally covered by the rough armor. Mark's armor was not only odd-looking but did not cover his body properly. The armor covered Mark's torso for the most part, together with the upper part of his lower body. However, his back and the left side had large unprotected gaps. Mark's arms and legs were mostly unarmored too. His left forearm seemed to have a gauntlet, and his right shoulder had a shoulder pad. His left leg had what appeared to be a greave, while the other foot only had a metal shoe. Lastly, Mark's face was only half covered, with only the left side being fully covered, having a slit allowing his left eye to see through. This appearance emphasized Mark's left eye, which glowed brightly violet inside, and the glow seemed to extend outside the armor. One particular characteristic of Mark's current armor was the glowing red veins on it. It made everyone feel as if the armor was actually part of his body. These red veins extended to his wings, making these 3 pairs of wings look more sinister. Mark's hair was still pitch black in color with a red and whitish sheen. However, his skin now shared the same color as his hair. Moreover, his whole body had what appeared to be pointy branches that had a slightly yellowish glow. These branches seemed similar to how lightning appeared in the sky. However, aside from size and his current appearance, none of those were the most eye-catching. What had caught everyone's attention the most was Mark's right arm, which was large and did not seem proportional to his body. Compared to Mark's left arm, together with the gauntlet it wore, his right arm was 3 to 4 times thicker. The right arm appeared to be mutated, with his right hand looking like a giant crystallized hand with metal claws instead of fingers. Furthermore, that had exuded an uncomfortable aura. That was right. His right hand seemed to exude miasma. And in Mark's attack just now, it was the very same right hand that hit Sonogo. The claws actually tore through Sinago's aura, although Sonogo managed to avoid getting wounded by it. Asterisk asterisk. With this, they can only win now, Fourth declared with a bitter smile. She was really worried about one of her 2 candidates dying here. She only had 2 candidates, after all, compared to the other eyes that had more. But her worry was actually unnecessary. Not only that the little sylph that always sat on Mark's shoulder and incarnate of a goddess, but he actually got the powerful ability of the earth demon deity, Teray. He utilized it even better than we thought, 19th said, seemingly interested in Mark's current form. Is that permanent? May asked the eyes, in worry. He can turn back, right? You should not worry about his transformation. It's a magical one and not a physical mutation, 19th smiled at May. This change is only temporary. What you should think about is when this battle is over. Mark will be extremely weakened after undergoing such transformation for the first time. May sighed in relief after hearing 19th's reply. It was not like she did not like Mark's current appearance. It was just that being a giant would be inconvenient in many ways. That reaction from May made those around her shrug. Her priorities were misplaced, for sure. The conversation was cut off immediately. It was because Mark began to move. Asterisk 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 Mark felt the changes in his body. Strangely, he could not feel his magical energy overflowing. Instead, his body was filled with strength. The wings on Mark's back opened widely, and a powerful explosion of wind occurred right behind him. With its help, Mark flew forwards, charging towards Sonogo. On the other hand, Sinago's aura was definitely thinner than before. He might have been able to resist the lightning from the tribulation, but it had a massive cost. However, Sinago's innate physical prowess was not reduced even a tiny bit. Well, his speed was slightly slower. Even so, it was slower in terms of gods and not human standards. His movements were still invisible to the human eye. Nonetheless, it was hard to know whether Sonogo could recognize Mark at all. But as Sonogo found Mark to be a new threat, he responded to the incoming attack. Sinago's giant body disappeared, moving at his top speed. In a blink of an eye, he appeared behind Mark, who was still amidst his charge. From behind, Sonogo shot several bolts of lightning from his hands towards Mark's back. In response to the sudden attack, Mark strongly flapped his wings. A cloud of miasma was released behind him and swallowed the bolts of lightning into nothingness while it concealed his body. Sonogo was surprised as he recognized that cloud of black mist. However, confident in the aura surrounding his body, Sonogo charged toward Mark without fear. Once the miasma got in contact with Sinago's aura, it immediately dispersed. It was the expected outcome as the godly aura was the bane of the corrupted miasma. But as Sonogo passed through the cloud of miasma, a large hand emerged from the inside it. Bam! Sonogo was surprised and retreated as fast as he could. His body flickered and appeared several hundred meters away instantly. The remaining cloud of miasma dispersed and returned to its origin, revealing Mark with his outstretched right hand with all his fingers pointing forwards. Mark's indifferent expression was open for everyone to see as he stared at Sonogo. Then, something dripped down from Mark's claws, tainting the violent waters below red. Blood. Everyone was surprised to see blood dripping from Mark's claws. Was his hand bleeding? But it was strange that 2 areas were being dyed red, and it was a few hundred meters away from each other. Graaa! It was when a loud roar took their attention. There, Sonogo hovered away from Mark. Shockingly, his left arm dangled down, and blood dripped down to his hand and into the waters below. Sinago's left shoulder had a large hole on it, fitting the size of one of Mark's claws. It was clear. Mark's claws pierced through Sinago's aura and wounded him severely. The surprise came from the fact that it was such an effortless attack, yet it caused such a severe wound. Mark also paused, looking at his giant claws, opening and clenching them repeatedly. As he did so, there was a sinister feeling of corruption emanated from the claws. It was very similar to the feeling that a high concentration of miasma could bring to people. Lowering his arm, Mark readied to continue the battle. He now knew a few ways to end this farce. After all, this farce took too long, Mark murmured. Emihan. Mark called to the shocked Sylph with a slightly rough voice. Why yes? Emihan panicked a bit as she hurriedly replied. Take care of the support, Mark instructed Emihan. Focus on attacking Sonogo even if it doesn't hurt him. Okay. Emihan replied with a wide nod. Chimetras, Mark called the other, taking the humanoid chimeras. Attention. Whenever there's a good opportunity, restrain that guy. For now, join Emihan and attack Sonogo as much as possible. Chimetras nodded silently, preparing his next attacks. In front of the three, Sinago's eyes glared at Mark with hatred. You, again. Sonogo surprisingly uttered several words to Mark. Unfortunately, Mark was not inclined to give Sonogo his words. In the first place, it would be questionable if Sonogo would be able to understand Mark's words. Mark, instead, flapped his wings, charging at Sonogo for the next attack. Sonogo responded in kind. He ignored the pain in his shoulder and flew toward Mark at breakneck speeds. Even if he was injured, his speed did not wane at all. And knowing that Mark's miasma would only erase his magical attacks, Sonogo aimed for a physical one. It was also to get revenge for his wound that was made by a simple poke of Mark's claw. The space trembled as Sonogo unleashed a punch. It was a punch too fast that no one was able to see it coming. Boom! The wind exploded as the impact of the punch was unleashed. Not on Mark, however, but on the empty space behind him. It actually caused the air to shoot down to the waters a kilometer away and caused an explosive splash. Mark, who tilted his head and wings to his right, evaded the attack by a hair's breadth. He evaded an invisible and powerful attack, just by moving his body slightly. It was such an impossible feat. Unknown to everyone, it was all thanks to his current form. It allowed his clairvoyance to reach another level, albeit temporarily. Mark stared at Sonogo, who became startled by his attack missing. The guy retreated fast, even before Mark could make a slight move. Following the hasty retreat, Mark just hovered there, menacingly. It was unknown whether he was doing it on purpose or if it was the effect of his transformation. But compared to his usual self, the current Mark seemed to be severely lacking in terms of expression, fake or not. In any case, while Sinago's speed was still proven to be troublesome, Mark could now fight on equal grounds. Mark's charge was paused slightly by Sinago's fast attack and sudden retreat. As this situation would not do anything well, Mark could only push for another attack. This time, Mark moved differently. Emihan had already flown higher than the rest. This way, the smaller would be able to have a wider view, and it would be easier for her to read Sinago's movements. At a good angle, Emihan waved her hands, and the wind around her began to gather and dance. Dozens of invisible blades of wind were conjured and rained towards Sinago's position. On the other hand, Chimetras called upon his own wind blades and attacked from another angle. In an instant, Sonogo found himself besieged by dozens to 100 blades of wind, most of which did not really harm him after hitting his body, but some managed to strip a part of his aura and leave a few scratches on his body. Sonogo had no choice but to evade. Realizing that his aura was being slowly chipped away once again, he surely moved fast, and no one was able to see where he would go. But as another surprise to everyone, Sonogo actually appeared in front of Mark, with his back facing the ladder. Mark had already positioned himself the moment Sonogo decided to move. Sonogo suddenly felt the danger behind him and hurriedly tried to flee. And he vanished right away before appearing somewhere else. However, everyone watching stared with wide eyes as they saw Mark left in place with a souvenir in his claws. Graaa. Sonogo growled in pain as he looked at Mark, holding onto one of his torn wings.